Hi everyone. Today I'll be walking you through a simple but essential skill for developers, how to store API keys securely in a .env or an environment file instead of hard coding them. This is one of those small habits that makes a huge difference in the workplace because it keeps your projects more secure, more professional, and easier for teams to collaborate on as a developer. With pretty much no matter what you work on, whether it be an app or a service or platform that involves some sort of development, you often run into having to use APIs. And your API key is a secure way for your app to connect to these services that the APIs provide you with. For example, if you're coming up with a AI bot for tic-tac-toe that might be able to algorithmically decide the next move or next best move or next winning move or your chances and probability of certain outcomes, you might rely on an OpenAI API to do so. Let's draw from a more personal example. Recently, I was able to work on a project for FEMA where we coordinated information from Twitter to determine the location of natural disasters. There are two APIs that we had to rely on. Or maybe you're watching a live stream from a third-party platform. They have to use a Twitch, somehow embed a Twitch API into their service. So your API key is secured, and so that's why hard coding this is never a good idea. Let's show you the wrong way. Right now, I've hard coded my API key directly in my code. It feels simple at first. You just kind of, you paste the key and it works, but it's a huge security risk because the key is exposed in the code. If I accidentally push this file to GitHub, the entire internet now has my key. Even worse, if I work on a team, every developer would constantly edit the same file with their own key, which gets messy really fast. So how do we fix this then? The solution is to use a .env file to store these keys outside of the code. So an env file is a simple text file where you put your sensitive information like API keys, passwords, or maybe database URLs. And then your application will load these values or variables securely in the environment at runtime. This way your code stays clean and your secret, sorry, and your secret variables stay out of sight or out of the main repository. So the very first step is to create a .env file. As you see in my code, here is my old way of referencing my API key. I'm directly in my app, and this is for Python, so I'm directly in my app.py file where my main method is, and I'm directly referencing my API key. So here we can see if I were to run print, my API key, this is the output I get. So pretty much anyone running the script can see this. Like, this is not good. We want it to be secured during runtime. So the very first step is to create a .env file. So we get a file, new file, or new text file is fine. And you just want to make it a text file and save it as a .env. Once we've done that, we'll end up with a file like this. It may have a settings next to it because it recognizes the .env tag. And you just want to paste in your API key based on what you have from whatever API you're referencing. And you want to paste it as such with no quotes, no unusual spaces, just simply putting the text as it is. And a lot of websites will kind of show you what your API key should look like or how it should be formatted. You can often find that. So here's my sample API key I have, let's say. Step 2 is to now install dependencies. These env.env format files, for most of them, most languages need a helper library to understand them and unpackage them. So in Python, we use this library called python-dotnv. So for this demo, since we're using Python, I'm going to run pip install python dotnv, just like that, this command. And I'll actually have it right here, because this is what would be associated and the library you would need in order to understand the env file and have it working at runtime. So I'm going to enter that in my command prompt. And by the way, my command prompt here, I have gone to the root of the directory I'm working in, which is called env demo. And that's where I'm running this pip, which is Python's library installer, pip install, and then python dot.env. As you can see, I already have it. And so this just ensures that when I run my Python app at runtime, that the env file will actually be referenced and loaded in. Step 3 is to now update our code and load the env into our code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out our old code. And I'm going to put this in between a line of comments. And I'm going to implement our new code. So the very first thing we want to do is import this dot.env library that we just installed with the pip package installer. So I'm going to write from dot.env, import load, and as you can see on it comes up, load underscore dot.env, and then import OS. So when we call load dot.env, this tells Python to read our environment file and then load those variables into the environment. So instead of hard coding, we are fetching our key with the OS get environment and then referencing our API key. So let's implement the rest of this. So we need to now call load dot env and set our API key value, not directly at hard coding it, but instead referencing that OS get environment API key. And then this tells us to go to the environment and reference this API key value. So just so that we can see the difference between hard coding and securely using an ENV file, let's try to print what our API key would be. And you'll see so when we run it again, right, we'll remember to save and we're going to run it again. As you can see, the API key is still the same as before, which means it's still referencing your API key within the context of your environment file, which is not available to everyone else on GitHub. So the key is not in the code that everyone else can see, but it still remains the same value. So just a recap of what we did, the very first thing we want to do, if you have hard-coded a bunch of dependencies, API keys in your main code, you first want to create that .env file with that .env reference name. So this is a text file, and it should be in the same directory as your main app. Then you want to install the helper dependencies. This specific tutorial is for Python, so most languages require helper library to use these Python files. So different languages, Linux, C, etc., might require different versions, or the command might look different on different systems in the command prompt. And so that would be language dependent. Then you want to load .env in your code with whatever language's helper package or helper library or methods are used to do so, because we want to tell our main code to read the env file and load those variables into the environment. And lastly, it's important to remember that you should follow and maintain best practices. So, always add this env to your git ignore file, first of all, so it never gets committed to GitHub. And never share these files publicly. If a key gets leaked, you need to rotate it immediately. And that means just generating a new one and deleting an old one. Different API services might have different rules and regulations on that, and that varies for each one. So it's best to just have these preventive practices in place at first. For larger production systems, you might move beyond ENV files to services like maybe AWS has some good ones like Secrets Manager or even HashiCorp's Vault. Those are different kind of package dependency security services. But for local development, .env is a perfect starting point and a good practice, remember. Takeaways, why are we doing this? Hard coding keys isn't secure, and using env stores keys safely, especially for very secure content or matter that, you don't want your key getting out to someone else. Always git ignore it though, because it would be redundant to create an env and then commit it to the repository anyways. So yeah, just remember these practices and you will be set. Thank you for watching. Try this out in your next project if you're not already doing so. If you have something for school or a personal project, this is a great use case. And I encourage you to try this right away. It only takes a couple minutes, but it will, if you're not already using it, make your code safer and more professional. Thanks. Bye, guys.